We have the brand new for 2025 Polygon Helios A in a size large coming in at 8.2 kilograms. And that includes a Di2 105 12 speed, carbon rims. It does not include pedals, but it does include a out front computer mount. 8.2 kilograms. I have been waiting for this bike to be released for 7 months, ever since I had seen the Malaysian Continental team racing with this bike at the UAE tour earlier this year. Yo, welcome back to the channel, boys and girls. In today's video, we are taking a look at the brand new for 2025 Polygon Helios A. So in this video, we're going to be going over the specs, the details on this bike. Of course, we're going to weigh it out. And then, of course, we'll also be taking this bike out on the road so I can give you some of my first initial thoughts on this bike. Because this bike has so many interesting and incredible features that it almost seems like it's too good to be true. Huge shout out to Bikes Online USA as well as Bikes Online Australia for sending me out this bike for testing and review. So without further ado, let's begin. Okay, so as I mentioned in the introduction of this video, guys, this is the brand new for 2025 Polygon Helios A. As you guys can see, looking at the design of this thing is wickedly aggressive. But let's talk about some of the main features on this bike, because there's a lot of interesting features on this bike that makes a lot of sense for a modern day race bike. So we have a T47 threaded bottom bracket. This is different, or updated, I should say, from the outgoing model of the Helios, which had a press fit BB86. So you get a T47 bottom bracket. You also now get a UDH rear derailleur hanger, which is a nice feature. You also get a frame weight that now, according to Polygon, says is around 800 grams. My suspicion is that's for an unpainted size small frame. But basically, this new Polygon Helios has shedded 150 grams of weight from the outgoing model. Also, too, with the fork now is around 300 grams, which Polygon claims is one of the lightest forks out on the market currently today. Let's also talk about the price. So the price on this, as you see it right here, this is for Shimano 105 Di2. It comes in at just a hair under $4,000, and currently it's on sale at Bikes Online for $3,799 USD. And as we have come to expect from Bikes Online, the unboxing process and the overall customer experience going with Bikes Online is fantastic, bar none from any of the other brands that I have ever featured on this channel. So you get a manual, you get some reflectors. You know I ain't finna use these. You get all the tools you need to put together your bike. You get some spare parts as well, all the clamping, etc. All the stuff, guys. This is why you go with Bikes Online. They do such a fantastic job with their customer experience. And it makes a lot of sense too, because when you are purchasing, say, this brand Polygon, if this is your first time dealing with Polygon, you may have a couple of questions and concerns and just worried about what sort of brand you're getting into. And Bikes Online just makes it so easily accessible for consumers to get into the brand, and they offer up a lot of support. So good job, guys. I really like the packaging on here. Some of the other aspects of this brand new Helios A is Polygon has decided to go with a separate handlebar and stand combo. More on that in a little bit. The tire clearance on here now has been updated to accommodate up to 34-seat tires out from the 32-seat tires out of the outgoing model. So really nice touch. This is something that you should expect in a modern day road bike. And another really nice touch that I appreciate that Polygon has done is, regardless of whether or not you go with the Shimano 105 version, or if you go with the Shimano Ultegra or the SRAM Red version, naturally those would cost a little bit more money. You are still getting the same top tier frame. And like I said, according to Polygon, this frame comes in at around 800 grams. My suspicion is probably more like 870 all in, painted in this size large. But regardless of the tier of bike that you purchase with this Polygon Helios A, you are getting the same level of frame across the board. Now moving on to the wheels. So really nice touch from Polygon this time versus their previous Polygon Helios is we finally get a set of carbon wheels versus the super duper heavy alloy wheels from the past. So these are Polygon's in-house brand. The depth on this is 45 millimeters, both front and rear. You get steel spokes. I'm not sure of the ratchet design. My suspicion is probably like a paw design versus like a ratchet design. And then as far as tires, you get the Pirelli P0 race tires, which is nice. And these are tubeless ready. So although these tires or wheels, I should say, come with a set of butyl inner tubes, these will be ready to go for tubeless should you decide to go with that option. And then according to Polygon's website, the weight on these set of wheels is around 1,500 grams. So not terrible. Very good wheels for training, and for most people at 1,500 grams, that's pretty good versus the like 2,200 grams that came on the other Polygon Stratos bike that I reviewed just a little while back. Check this out, guys. So as I was putting the bike together, I went to grab the seat post and I realized the Di2 battery is nowhere to be found. Typically on these Polygon bikes, the battery is nestled just inside at the bottom of the seat post, but I didn't find it. So I initially thought maybe they forgot to install the battery. But then I removed this plastic cover just underneath the bottom bracket area, and bro, the Di2 battery is nestled perfectly inside of the frame underneath the bottom bracket. I have never seen this design before. The attention to detail on this new Polygon is fantastic. It seems like, again, they've thought about everything. I haven't, even on some of the other like premium Western brands that I have featured before in the past, I've never seen this design before. This is fantastic. So there's a couple of benefits by going with this route. So number one is, should you be traveling or you need to remove the seat post, you don't have to disconnect the Di2 battery. So I can technically literally shift everything on the derailleurs because everything is connected inside. This will also protect the battery so that should you crash and something happens to that seat post, you won't have any problems at all. This is a fantastic design. I think a lot of brands should move over to this particular design. The only drawback to this is, should that battery malfunction or should you need to replace that battery after wear and tear, it might take a little bit more time to swap out that battery. But this is a fantastic design. It comes with a little screw to protect everything. Fantastic job, Polygon. Bro, my legs are so ashy. I'm out here looking like Ashy Larry from the Dave Chappelle Show, but I'm not a crackhead. But anyway, let's talk about the drivetrain or the group set. So as you guys can see, we are rocking again the Shimano Di2 105 a variant. Now, the reason why I went with this particular model versus some of the more pricier options that Polygon and Bikes Online has to offer on the website is I have a sneaky suspicion or a high suspicion that this is going to be the model to get when you look at in terms of the specs and just the overall value. Some of those other models like the SRAM Red is going to run you like $9,000 USD for the same exact frame and the group set. And then that's where it becomes a little bit of a difficult decision to invest your money in this bike. But at this price point, at $3,800 for what you get, including the group set, this, in my opinion, is the way to go. So we have a 52-36 crank out front. We have an 11-34 cassette out back. As far as the crank arm length is 172.5. So you know I'm going to be upgrading that later to some 170 cranks. And then as far as rotors go, we have, I believe it's actually 160 in the front and then 140 in the back. Moving right along, let's talk about the saddle and the seat post, starting with the seat post. So typically for this type of bike or just race bike in general, usually brands will offer two different seat posts, normally like a 0 millimeter or say like a 15 millimeter offset seat post. But in this case, Polygon basically opted to have one design. However, there's enough fore and aft movement ability on the seat post itself that you should be able to dial in and lock in your saddle position. Even though this design aesthetically is not my favorite, but it does make a lot of sense for functionality as well as just basically cost savings method. Now, this saddle, I won't speak on it too much because I've used this before on some of my other previous bike reviews from Polygon. This saddle is like almost, 280 grams. It's pretty heavy. It's not really a saddle that you would use for racing or aggressive riding, but of course, Polygon understands that saddle choices are a very personal decision. So there's no point in offering some super expensive saddle with this build, but this is the saddle that comes with the bike. Now, looking just at the overall design of the seat post itself, you're probably thinking, okay, this is going to be a proprietary design. So what happens should something happen to the seat post? But according to the website, guys, you can actually run a 27.2 round seat post in addition to the standard Aero seat post. I've never seen this design before at all. So if for some reason you don't want to run the arrow seat post, you can still use the clamp and just run a round seat post on this frame. I've never seen this before. This is wild, guys. So much attention to detail has gone into this Polygon frame. Here is the hardware for the seat post. So on the right, we have the wedge that clamps in with the seat post, and then you just torque it down to 6 Newton meters. And then on the left, this is what I was talking about earlier. So if you want to run a round seat post, you just pop this in here, install your round seat post, and then of course you use the same clamp. Like I said, guys, I've never seen this design before. It's pretty intuitive. Good job, Polygon.
Okay, so let's talk about the front end of this bike, the cockpit. So as I mentioned earlier in this video, guys, rather than going with a one-piece integrated cockpit from FSA/ACR, I believe it was their Vision Metron cockpit, Polygon instead decided to go with a separate handlebar and stem combo, which I think was a great move from them. And the reason for this is Polygon says is basically just to have a little bit more adjustability when it comes to rider specific needs. So the stem itself, it's a 120 millimeter length stem. And then this arrow handlebars is pretty interesting. It feels very sturdy, very stiff and robust. We have like 39 centimeters in the hoods, and then the drops flare out to, I measured around like 45 or 46 centimeter. This almost seems like a gravel handlebar, but the good thing is, at least in the drops, you should have so much leverage to sprint, something that you would want with a bike like this. And then in the hoods, even at 39 centimeters, you should be able to get pretty locked in a TT elbow position over the hoods, especially at this size of geometry and for the height that which this size of bike is for. The overall geometry on this brand new Polygon Helios A, guys, it's very aggressive. In fact, this is probably the most aggressive geometry of a bike that I've ever featured on this channel. The reach on this is like 407 millimeters, but then the stack is only like 557. What that means is, even in its stock form, this is probably all the spacers I'll need to match my bike fit compared to something like my Tavello Aero.
And as per usual, here is a side-by-side comparison against my primary road bike, which is my Tavello Aero. Now, if you look at the geometry chart against both of these frames, you'll notice that both the reach on the Helios A is longer, as well as the stack height being a bit lower. However, because this has a little bit more spacers on there, and because the rise or the angle of the stem is only -7 versus -10 on the Tavello Aero, it's more or less the same exact fit in its stock form. I have the saddle height about the same. I'm actually have it at its maximum insertion as I can before I cut the seat post, but everything is basically 1-to-1, despite the fact too that the overall wheelbase on the Helios A is actually a bit longer than on the Tavello, and the Tavello Aero is already a long frame in and of itself. But one thing to note, which is a bit interesting, is the Helios A, its choice of the factory or stock handlebar setup or the cockpit setup. So it's a separate handlebar and stem combo. I measured in the hoods like 39 centimeters, which is totally fine. On the Tavello Aero, it's 36 centimeters in width, but then in the drops, because it has this flare design, I measured like 44 or 45 centimeters in the drops. So not exactly ideal for me, but for sprinting purposes, I think it's totally fine because you'll have way more leverage on the Helios A than you will on the Tavello Aero.
So keep in mind that because this is a race bike, like I said, guys, this bike was designed by the professionals on the Conti team to meet the needs that they needed in order to be in races like the Tour of UAE earlier this year in 2025. So this is very much a race-focused bike. So what that means is, as a rider and a consumer, you'll have to pay very, very close attention, probably more than any other bike that I featured on this channel. You're gonna have to pay very close attention to the geometry chart on this bike just to even see if this bike is gonna work for you. But thankfully for myself, even though I'm not a pro racer at all, you know, I've done a few crit races this year so far, which has been fantastic. You should definitely go watch those videos. But thankfully for myself, simply because I have a lot of reach in my arms, I have really long arms, and I'm pretty flexible, The geometry on this works very well for me in its stock configuration.
Another aspect to this frame where it's clear that Polygon has really thought about everything is we have 3 bottle cage mounts. And this is nice because this allows you to position the bottle cages either higher or lower up on the down tube, depending on how you like your bottles to position. I like them to be on the lower side, especially because I have longer arms. So I'll be using these 2 positions right here. The only other bike that I have featured that is using multiple bottle cage mounts like this has been my Tarmac SO8. And this is a feature that I think all road bikes should have. And also too, they also have a bottle cage mount underneath the down tube as well. So if you have some super long distance race or ride that you're doing, maybe you want to put on some TT bars, you'll have plenty of mounts for all of your water bottles.
Now, as of right now, I only have 2 points of criticism with this bike, and that has to do with the seat post as well as the front end. So with the seat post, you might need to cut it down in order to get it to your desired height. Now, of course, this bike comes pre-built from the factory, so you should be able to put everything together in under 30 minutes, something that I really appreciate. And even for myself, I do suspect that I do have this at the correct height, but even for me, I might still need to just trim down the seat post just due to the design of this frame. As you can see, you don't get a lot of wiggle room when it comes to adjustability on the seat post, so just keep that in mind. And the second point I have has to do with the front end. Now, I am happy that Polygon has decided to go with a separate handlebar and stem combo, but if for some reason you aren't able to make this front end work for you, you're going to have a lot of work ahead of you to get this to work because everything is routed internally. For myself, I'm a home builder, so this isn't a big deal, but good luck. You're going to have to take this to a bike shop to get all of this swapped out. And I don't even know if these parts are proprietary to Polygon or not. So who knows if you're able to even get a different size of the handlebars or even the stem. But with that being said, the good news is Polygon is using the very popular FSA bearing standard. So the plastic bearing cover as well as the spacers, it's all just standard FSA stuff. And for myself, I actually have a bunch of different integrated cockpits that use the FSA standard. So if you don't want to use this at all, it's going to be a lot of work, but there are options on the market from FSA in order to get the front end to your desired spec. Freehub sound tests on these in-house wheels from Polygon. These are the Link Beta 45. So we have 45 millimeters both front and rear, and then 1,500 grams for the set. Tubeless ready. Good Lord. Woo! Yo, that is so loud. I got a headache. So let's continue. Overall, guys, I'm just thoroughly impressed at a first glance with just the fit and finish and the attention to detail on this Polygon Helios A. It has all of the modern creature comforts you would expect, especially for a direct consumer brand. I even really like this particular paint job, which this is, I believe, is only exclusive to the 105 Di2 version. So kudos to Polygon for thinking about that as well. You have this nice gloss black finish off the top, and then as you get down below, you have more of a matte black finish. And then even the decals, the sort of holographic decals on the Polygon font, I really like that too. But just all the small details, guys, this isn't no cookie cutter frame. This isn't some open mold frame where they just slap their decal on the down tube. This bike has been thoroughly thought out. T47 bottom bracket, UDH. You get adjustability on the saddle without having to loosen the bolts on the saddle itself. You have the adjustability on the front end, the cockpit. And then you even have wheels that are going to be good enough to be able to take out on the road because they are, like I said, only 1,500 grams. And then if you want to slap in a power meter or just upgrade some of the other components as you go along, you'll be able to do that too. So now the only thing left to do, guys, is to finally take this bike out on the road so I can give you some of my first initial thoughts on this brand new Polygon Helios A. All right, y'all, we are back outside, or afuera, as my Spanish speakers would say. We got Shed Aquarium in the distance. You can't see it, but we also got Lollapalooza going on. So summertime Shy is in full effect. It's like 73 degrees here, a little bit humid, but we got a nice breeze. coming off the lake in the far distance. So let's talk about this first initial ride on this brand new Polygon Helios A. Directly out of the box, this bike is really good, surprisingly good. I give it a solid 7.5. And the reason why I'm gonna stop and reserve it at 7.5 is because I'm gonna have to do some upgrades and changes to this bike to suit my personal riding style in order to give this bike a true one-to-one against my other aggressive aero / racing oriented bikes. But one of the things I noticed right away is on the flat and just everyday roads of where I ride here locally, this bike is surprisingly comfortable. And I suspect there's a couple of reasons why this bike is comfortable. So number one is the wheelbase on this bike is slightly longer than some of my other traditional aero bikes. And number two is these wheels. So these wheels, you know, they're not going to be the most premium wheels on earth, but they do come with steel spokes, so that should add to the comfort of this riding. And that's even with respects to the fact that we are running butyl tubes versus either latex, TPU, or even running these tires tubeless. This bike is surprisingly comfortable. Yet despite the comfort of this bike, I've noticed that when you get out of the saddle, or if you go for a sprint, the bottom bracket area, because it's so chunky with these aerofoil tubes, there is a lot of stiffness and a lot of go in order to allow you to really transfer the power. So somehow the way this bike is set up and designed, it allows for comfort with the longer wheelbase, and then you also have enough stiffness in the areas where you want it most so that you can really put down the power. Bro, look at how these decals are glistening in the sunlight. Everything matches here on the down tube, the fork, even the decals on the wheels, everything is just shimmering and shining. It reminds me a lot of myself right after I shave and wax my legs and apply lotion. But one of the areas I want to talk about, and I think this is going to be the most controversial or make or break of this overall bike, is with this front end. So in the hoods, like I said, it's about 39 centimeters, and then in the drops, it's like 45 or 46. Truthfully, I don't really like that. That is a little bit too extreme of a flare on this. Now, you do get a lot of leverage when you're out of the saddle or when you're sprinting, and I am still able to kind of get in a aero position over the hoods, but I think just the extreme difference from the hoods to the drops is a little bit too extreme for my comfort. And keep in mind that because this is a size large, and Polygon and Bikes Online, they do offer smaller sizes, a lot of the specs and components on this bike is really dependent on the size you get. So if you do get a smaller size of this bike, you won't have such wide drops. It'll still be an extreme flare, but they try to keep it somewhat proportional to the size of your bike. For example, if you also go down in size of the bike, you also should get shorter crank lengths as well. Another thing too with this overall cockpit is the reach on the drops is like 80 millimeters long. So the good news is when you're really, you know, tucked in and putting the power down, it's fine. However, when you do get out of the saddle, or if you're going to sprint, you just got to be careful with your hand placement, because there is potential for your kind of, you know, the bone in your wrist to kind of get stuck underneath here in the drops. This is not my preferred thing, but I will talk in a second about what my plans are going to be on the front end. I think at the price point for this particular build with the Di2 105 12-speed, I think any consumer looking for a bike where they can just basically order and have a ready-made bike, I think any consumer in this budget are going to be thrilled with this bike, as long as that front end can work for you. But I think for all other consumers out here who are just looking to get on a bike, don't have to worry about upgrading any components or anything like that, if they want to run these tires tubeless, they're not going to have any issues with this bike at all. This bike so far has been really, really good. One thing I noticed immediately on this bike, especially on a day like today when we have a lot of winds coming off the lake, is comparing this frame set to something like a Tarmac SO8. It's not the best when it comes to crosswinds. You can definitely feel the wind hitting the side on the down tube, and especially that chunky frontal area as well. So this bike is not the best when it comes to crosswind. However, when you get into a tailwind, bro, when you get into a tailwind, even with this setup of wheels and tire combo, this bike just floats and flies in the tailwind section. So that's kind of the trade-off you get with these more chunkier aero bikes. They're just not going to perform the best when it comes to crosswinds, even despite the fact that we're running not that deep of a wheel, like a 45 millimeter depth wheel. But when you get into a tailwind section, this is where this bike really, really shines. Now keep in mind guys that this is just a first initial ride impressions on this bike, so I don't want to run around telling you guys, oh my god, this bike is incredible, it's the best thing since sliced bread. I'll have to of course do more testing and riding on this bike to give you guys a more deep dive on what it's like to live with this bike on a day-to-day basis. But with that being said, I do want to talk about some of the upgrades that I'm going to make on this bike. So number one is, although the saddle is pretty comfortable and I was able to find a pretty decent position on this bike, being able to slide it back, forward and back, the saddle's gonna go. Of course, I'm gonna be putting on my Sella Italia SLR boost saddle. That is my tried and true saddle on all my race bikes. The second upgrade I'm gonna make is, you guys know, I'm gonna upgrade these wheels. At 1500 grams steel spokes, they're perfectly fine, especially at this price point for a bike that's ready to go out of the box. No complaints at this price point, but I am going to be putting on a different set of wheels. Probably either will go with my Elite Drive 65mm deep wheels. Since this is an aero bike, you might as well just go all out. Maybe I'll put my number 6 on there. So that's the second upgrade I'm going to do. The third upgrade is, so we're using these power meter pedals, but I do have a spider based power meter that I'm going to swap on here. That's going to save massive weight, because the majority of the weight when it comes to this Shimano 105 Di2 group set, a lot of the added weight versus the Ultegra version is all in this super robust but heavy crank. So that's gonna go for a carbon-based, spider-based power meter. And then the fourth change is, guys, I am gonna swap out this cockpit. Thankfully, like I've mentioned before, is I do have some integrated cockpits that run this FSA standard. So it'll be a couple hours of work to swap this out, but for myself and my riding dynamics, I don't really like this extreme aggressive difference in the hoods to the drops, but they are very comfortable for what they are. The handlebar tape is really grippy, but it just doesn't really suit my particular needs. And it turns out that I actually did not need to trim down the seat post. I was able to get it just the right height with respects to this crank length. Now these cranks are 172.5, so once I swap this into a lighter spider-based power meter that's using 170mm length crank arms, then this will basically be a non-issue. So it's basically already where it needs to be, and then when I get those different cranks on here, I'll probably just need to raise up maybe like 2 to 3 millimeters. And because of these upgrades that I plan to do on this bike, as well as switching over from butyl inner tubes to running tubeless tires with GP 5000 tubeless tires, we're looking at saving around 700 grams easily over the stock build on this bike, which should bring this bike down to around 7.4 to 7.5 kilograms all in. But not only that, not only will this bike be lighter than the stock build, we're also going to be a little bit more faster, a little bit more aerodynamic as well, because the wheels I'm putting on here, those Elite wheels, not only are the deeper depth, so they should be faster, but they're also lighter than the stock wheels. So that is going to wrap up today's video, guys. Stay tuned in the coming months as I will continue to test and check out this bike. But so far, my first initial impressions on this bike has been really, really good. Naturally, I'm going to have to do some upgrades on this bike, like swapping out the saddle, maybe even the cockpit, of course, the wheels. But at the price point that it's at currently, guys, for like $37.99 USD, you're getting an incredible value with a race geometry, Di2 105, you get carbon wheels, all the things that you would want for a bike directly out of the box. Questions, comments, and concerns, please feel free to leave them down below, and I will check you guys on the next one. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to Bikes Online. Peace.